In this video, we'll explore the cases of women in the United States who, after committing serious crimes, were sentenced to death. We'll examine the details of their crimes, the circumstances that led them to face this sentence, as well as their last words and the decisions they made regarding their last meal before the execution. Welcome to Criminal Records. Velma Barfield. State, North Carolina. In the 1970s, Velma Barfield caused the death of her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor, by poisoning him with arsenic in his tea and beer. However, investigations revealed that her story was much darker, as she was also implicated in the death of her ex-husband, Jennings Barfield, in 1970. In 1976, Velma began working as a caregiver at a nursing home, where she was involved in several suspicious deaths of the people she cared for. Among them were her mother, Lillian Bullard, who died suddenly in 1974, and Dolly Edwards and her husband Montgomery Edwards, who both died under suspicious circumstances in 1977. It was at this nursing home where suspicions about Velma began, as it was discovered that she had been involved in the deaths of Dolly and Montgomery Edwards. When the body of her ex-husband, Jennings Barfield, was exhumed, it was also found to contain arsenic. This eventually led to her arrest. During Velma's trial, she was only judged and convicted for the death of Roland Stewart Taylor. She was sentenced to death and held in a North Carolina prison, where she became the only woman on death row at that time. On November 2, 1984, hours before her execution, she requested as her last meal a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. During her final moments, dressed in pink pajamas and an adult diaper, her last words were, "I know everyone has gone through a lot of pain. All the families are connected, and I am sorry. And I want to thank everyone who has supported me through all of these 6 years." After receiving the lethal injection, doctors confirmed her death hours later. Velma Barfield became the first woman executed in the United States after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Karla Faye Tucker, State, Texas. In 1983, Karla Faye Tucker, under the influence of substances, participated in a violent robbery that resulted in the deaths of Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton. During her trial, Karla appeared completely high, which almost led to the suspension of the trial. Due to the effect of the drugs, she even expressed that she experienced pleasure while committing the crime. For her lack of remorse and empathy, she was sentenced to death in 1984 for these murders. In prison, Karla spent over 14 years on death row. During her time incarcerated, she underwent a profound transformation. She converted to Christianity and showed genuine remorse for her crimes, which caught the attention of many. On February 3, 1998, despite international efforts to commute her sentence, Karla was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Prison, Texas. On her last day, she requested a simple last meal: a banana, a peach, and a salad with ranch dressing. Before she died, her final words were directed to the victims' families and her loved ones. "I am so sorry. I hope God gives you peace with this. I love you all very much. Now I'll be face to face with Jesus. I'll wait for you." Judy Buenoano, State, Florida. In 1971, Judy Buenoano was involved in the death of her husband, James Goodyear, through progressive poisoning. In 1973, she began a relationship with Bobby Joe Morris in Colorado, who died in 1978 under suspicious circumstances. Years later, investigations revealed arsenic in his body. In 1979, her son Michael Buenoano suffered a serious illness that left him paraplegic, and in 1980, he drowned in a lake after Judy took him there. That same year, it's also suspected that she was involved in the death of Gerald Dossett. In 1982, Judy began telling her friends that her new fiancé, John Gentry, had a terminal illness. And in 1983, she tried to end his life by tampering with his vehicle with an explosive device. During the investigation, the police discovered that Judy had been administering harmful substances to him, which led to the exhumation of her other victims and confirmation of a similar pattern in each case. It is believed that her actions were motivated by insurance fraud and financial gain. In 1984, Judy Buenoano was found guilty of her son Michael's death and the attack on John Gentry, receiving life imprisonment and a 12-year sentence respectively. A year later, in 1985, she was sentenced to death for the case of her husband, James Goodyear. The day before her execution, she was offered a last meal and chose broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, and hot tea. On March 30th, 1998, after spending 13 years on death row, her sentence was carried out at Florida State Prison. When asked if she had any last words, she remained silent. Betty Beets, State, Texas. In 1980, Betty Lou Beets, 47, divorced her third husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, and after their separation, no one knew of his whereabouts. In 1982, Betty married for the fourth time to Jimmy Don Beets, a retired firefighter from Dallas. In 1983, she reported her husband missing in Texas, claiming he went fishing and never returned. However, her son, Robert Branson, testified that his mother had told him she wanted to kill her husband. When he returned home, Robert found Jimmy Don dead and helped Betty hide the body in the backyard. During the investigation, the police discovered the body of Doyle Wayne. Barker was also buried in the backyard, leading to Betty's arrest. On June 8, 1985, when the police found the remains of both husbands on Betty's property, she tried to blame her children, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Betty was found guilty of the murder of Jimmy Don Beets and sentenced to death on October 11, 1985. Although she was also tried for the murder of Doyle Wayne Barker, her death sentence made a second trial unnecessary. Betty Lou Beets spent 15 years on death row, filing multiple appeals. Finally, she was executed on February 24, 2000, by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. When asked if she wanted to make a final statement, she remained silent. Christina Riggs, State, Arkansas. Christina Marie Riggs was found guilty for the tragic loss of her two children, 5-year-old Justin Dalton Thomas and 2-year-old Shelby Alexis Riggs, in November 1997. In an attempt to end their lives, she used a chemical substance, but when it wasn't administered correctly, Justin experienced pain before Riggs resorted to another method. Seeing what happened, she decided to do the same to Shelby, without using the substance. After these events, she attempted to take her own life, but was found unconscious 19 hours later. During the trial, Riggs argued that she suffered from mental health issues, but she was found guilty and rejected any attempt at legal defense. She was sentenced to death and sent to death row in Arkansas. On May 1, 2000, for her last meal on death row, she requested supreme pizza, salad, fried okra, cherry and lime soda, and strawberry pie. The next day, she was executed by lethal injection, using the same substance she had previously attempted to use. In her final moments, she expressed her sorrow with last words directed to her children. "There are no words to express how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. In no way can I make up for or take away the pain I have caused everyone I knew." Now I can go back to my children as I had always wanted to. I love you, my babies. Wanda Jean Allen, State, Oklahoma. In 1989, Wanda Jean Allen and her partner, Gloria Jean Leathers, became involved in a tragic incident in front of the Oklahoma City Police Department. Their relationship had been marked by constant conflicts, and on the night of December 2, 1988, after a heated argument in a store, Leathers decided to go to the police station to file a report. However, before she could do so, Allen shot her in the abdomen. 3 days later, Leathers succumbed to the severity of her injuries. On April 18, 1989, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. Allen spent 12 years on death row, during which she embraced the Christian faith. For her last meal on death row, she made no special request. On January 11, 2001, the state of Oklahoma carried out her execution by lethal injection. 24 of the victim's relatives were present in the witness room. While lying on the gurney, Allen uttered her last words. "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Before the procedure was completed, she smiled at her lawyer and stuck out her tongue, a gesture some interpreted as a defiance or a farewell. Her death was confirmed at 9:21 p.m. Marilyn Plants, State, Oklahoma. Marilyn Plants devised a plan to end her husband's life and claim his $300,000 life insurance. To do so, she convinced her lover, Clifford Bryson, and an acquaintance, William McKimble, to carry out the attack. When her husband arrived home after work, he was ambushed by both men, who repeatedly beat him with bats. While their children slept, Plants instructed her accomplices to ensure he didn't survive, then set the house on fire to stage an accident. McKimble was arrested shortly after the crime. He turned himself in and cooperated with the police to incriminate Marilyn Plants and Clifford Bryson. After pleading guilty, he was sentenced to life in prison. In contrast, Marilyn Plants and her lover, Clifford Bryson, were sentenced to death in Oklahoma. Years later, Bryson was executed in 2000. On May 1, 2001, after spending 12 years on death row, the day of Marilyn Plants' execution finally arrived. The day before, she was given the opportunity to request her last meal. For her last meal on death row, Plants requested a chicken taco salad, 2 soft chicken tacos, a Mexican pizza, 2 cinnamon rolls, a slice of pecan pie, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. On May 1, 2001, Marilyn Plants was executed in Oklahoma by lethal injection. Before her execution, she was allowed to make her last statement. Plants quoted scripture and said, "I want to tell my whole family that I love them very much, especially Trina and Chris," referring to her 2 children who were not present. She continued, "What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world, and I just want everyone to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And if anyone wants to see me again, they must be born again." Lois Nadine Smith, State, Oklahoma. In 1982, Lois Nadine Smith committed the murder of Cindy Bailey following a confrontation. During this incident, Smith beat, stabbed Bailey in the throat, and shot her 9 times, in an attack driven by the suspicion that Bailey had hired a hitman to kill her son. At her trial, Smith's lawyers argued that she had acted under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and that her action was an impulsive act of protecting her son. However, despite this defense, she was convicted and sentenced to death. After spending nearly 20 years on death row, Smith was executed on December 4, 2001, becoming the third woman to be executed in Oklahoma that year. For her last meal, she requested grilled ribs, onion rings, strawberry pie, banana, and cherry lemonade. In her last words, Smith expressed her regret and said, "To the family, I want to tell you that I am sorry for all the pain I caused. Please forgive me." She also expressed her faith, stating that being separated from the body was being with the Lord. Hours later, her execution was confirmed. Linda Lyon Block, State, Alabama. In 1993, Linda Lyon Block, who had a high social status as a secretary at an animal shelter, was with her husband, George Sibley, and their son, Lyon, in Alabama. While fleeing from the law on a domestic assault charge, a police sergeant named Roger Motley approached the family vehicle. After a tense interaction, George Sibley fired first, and Linda Block, who was nearby, also opened fire, striking the sergeant, who later died from the wounds. Linda was sentenced to death along with her husband for the murder of Sergeant Motley, which occurred on October 4, 1993, in Opelika, Alabama. Several years later, George Sibley was executed on August 4, 2005, by lethal injection in Alabama. After spending nearly 8 years on death row, Block was executed on May 10, 2002, at the Holman Correctional Facility. She was the last person to be executed in the electric chair in Alabama, and the first woman executed in the state since 1957. Block did not request a last meal nor make a final statement. At midnight, she was placed in the electric chair, and at 12:01 a.m., the current was activated. She was declared dead at 12:10 a.m. Aileen Wuornos, State, Florida. In 1992, Aileen Wuornos killed Richard Mallory, claiming she did so in self-defense after being attacked while engaging in prostitution. Later, it was discovered that she had murdered 6 other men in the same manner. Wuornos was arrested in January 1991 after being identified by witnesses in a car accident, where she was found with a stolen car from one of her victims. Her partner, Tyria Moore, cooperated with the police in exchange for immunity and convinced Wuornos to confess. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. The process on death row was so long that Aileen Wuornos began asking for the process to be expedited. She went as far as to promise that she would kill again if released, and also appealed to the state of Florida to execute her immediately. When she was offered her last meal before execution, she did not request anything special, only a simple black coffee. On October 9, 2002, 11 years after her conviction, Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Her last words were, "I'll be back, like in the day of judgment." And she added, "Yes, I would like to say that I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back, like the 4th of July, with Jesus. June 6th, like in the movie. With all the great mothership, I'll be back, I'll be back." Frances Elaine Newton, State, Texas. In 1987, Frances Newton was accused of murdering her 23-year-old husband and 2 children, aged 7 and 21 months, with a .22 caliber firearm. She claimed that a drug dealer had killed her family, pointing out that her husband, Adrian, was a drug dealer with debts to his supplier. However, several elements pointed against her, such as the life insurance policies she took out on her husband and children 3 weeks before the crimes, worth $50,000. Additionally, it worked against her that she had hidden the murder weapon in a relative's house after the killings. These factors contributed to her conviction and death sentence. Frances Newton's case was postponed multiple times, with delays of up to 120 days before her execution. She spent nearly 17 years on death row. Despite numerous appeals and clemency requests, the execution was carried out on September 14, 2005. She became the first black woman executed in Texas since 1858, sparking protests due to uncertainty about her guilt. In her final moments, Newton did not issue any last statement and declined her last meal on death row. She maintained her innocence from her first interrogation in 1987 until her execution in 2005. Teresa Wilson Bean, State, Virginia. In 2002, Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis ordered the murder of her husband, Julian Clifton Lewis, and her stepson, Charles J. Lewis, with the intention of collecting a $250,000 life insurance policy. Charles, a U.S. Army reservist, was about to be deployed to Iraq when Teresa conspired with two young men, Matthew Jesse Schallenberger and Rodney Lamont Fuller, to carry out the crime. Teresa pretended to call emergency services for her husband, but waited 45 minutes before making the call, ensuring it was too late to save him. The investigation revealed that days before, she had tried to withdraw $50,000 with a forged check, raising suspicions about her involvement in the crime. When confronted by authorities, she confessed to paying the killers to carry out the murders, which led to her death sentence. 8 years later, on September 23, 2010, the time came for Teresa Lewis's execution. She was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. For her last meal on death row, she chose fried chicken, buttered peas, apple pie, and Dr. Pepper. In her final moments, Teresa addressed her stepdaughter, Kathy Lewis Clifton, who had come to witness the execution, and apologized for the deaths of her father and brother. Her last words were, "I just want Kathy to know that I love you and I'm so sorry." Kimberly LaGale McCarthy, State, Texas. In 1997, Kimberly LaGale McCarthy murdered her neighbor, Dorothy Booth, a 71-year-old retired university professor, in Lancaster, Texas. Using the excuse that she needed sugar, McCarthy gained entry into Booth's home, but her true intention was to rob her. Once inside, things got out of hand, and she ended up killing her. She then fled with the victim's purse and Mercedes-Benz, pawning her ring to buy crack. Authorities quickly linked McCarthy to the crime. She used Booth's credit cards at a liquor store and was found in possession of the victim's driver's license. Additionally, Booth's DNA was discovered on the murder weapon. With strong evidence against her, McCarthy was arrested and sentenced to death in 1998. She was also suspected of 2 other murders in 1988, but she was never convicted for those crimes. McCarthy's execution was initially scheduled for January 29, 2013, but it was postponed multiple times before finally taking place on June 26, 2013. For her last meal on death row, she made no special request, so she was given the standard prison menu. McCarthy was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, becoming the 500th person executed by the state since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. In her final moments, McCarthy addressed the witnesses of the execution, saying, "This is not a loss, this is a victory. Do you know where I'm going? I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith." Suzanne Margaret Basso, State, Texas. In 1998, Suzanne Margaret Basso, along with several others, was involved in the case of Louis Musso, a 59-year-old man with an intellectual disability. Musso had moved to Texas to live with Basso but soon became the victim of a brutal attack. He was beaten and burned with cigarettes while sitting on a carpet. Later, he was subjected to cruel treatment with a wire brush and submerged in a bathtub with cleaning chemicals. His body was later found in Galena Park, Texas, with the cause of death determined to be multiple blunt force injuries. Basso was arrested and, after a lengthy trial, sentenced to death. While on death row, she was held at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She did not request a special last meal before her execution, so she was given the standard prison meal. On February 5, 2014, Basso was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville Unit in Texas. She was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m. When asked for her last words, she said, "No, sir." Lisa Coleman, State, Texas. In 2004, Lisa Coleman was responsible for the death of her stepson, Devontae Williams, a 9-year-old boy who suffered from severe malnutrition, weighing only 16 kilos at the time of his passing. He also showed signs of restraint and physical abuse. Investigators later discovered that Coleman and her partner, Marcella Williams, had subjected Devontae to prolonged mistreatment and neglect. Marcella was sentenced to life in prison after testifying against Coleman. For her last meal on death row, Lisa Coleman did not request anything special. She was given the standard prison menu. 10 years later, on September 17, 2014, Lisa Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville Unit in Texas. She became the first 1,389th person to be executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. When asked for her final words, Coleman said, "I just want to tell my family I love them. My son, I love him. God is good. I'm done." Kelly Gissendaner, State, Georgia. On February 7, 1997, Kelly Gissendaner orchestrated the murder of her husband, Douglas Gissendaner. To carry out the crime, her lover, Gregory Bruce Owen, kidnapped Douglas, beat him, and stabbed him in the neck before setting his body on fire in a nearby wooded area. Kelly planned the murder to claim the house and Douglas's life insurance money. Owen was sentenced to 25 years in prison in exchange for his testimony, while Kelly received a death sentence. Kelly Gissendaner was executed on September 30, 2015, at 12:21 a.m. at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. She was the only woman on Georgia's death row and the first woman executed in the state in 70 years. For her last meal on death row, Gissendaner requested cornbread, buttermilk, 2 Whoppers with cheese and all the toppings, 2 large orders of French fries, cherry vanilla ice cream, popcorn, and lemonade. She also requested a salad with boiled eggs, tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, carrots, and cheese, dressed with Paul Newman's buttermilk dressing. Before her execution, Gissendaner cried and sang Amazing Grace. Her final words were, "God bless you all. I love you, Susan," she told her attorney, who responded with the same words. She then added, "Tell my kids I left singing Amazing Grace. Tell the Gissendaner family that I am so very sorry that such an amazing man lost his life because of me. If I could take it back, I would. I just hope they find peace and happiness." Lisa Marie Montgomery, State, Indiana. On December 16, 2004, Lisa Montgomery committed a shocking crime, taking the life of Bobby Joe Stinnett, who was 8 months pregnant at the time. Using a false identity, Montgomery connected with Stinnett through an online chat, arranging a meeting under the pretense of buying a dog. During their encounter, Montgomery attacked Stinnett, took her life, and then attempted to abduct the unborn child, trying to pass the baby off as her own. Stinnett's mother discovered her daughter's body and immediately alerted authorities. The baby was safely recovered and returned to Stinnett's family. Lisa Marie Montgomery was arrested and sentenced to death. 13 years later, on January 13, 2021, Montgomery became the first woman to be executed at the federal level in 67 years. She was pronounced dead at 1:31 a.m. Her execution sparked controversy, with many arguing that her history of severe abuse and mental illness should have been taken into account before carrying out such an irreversible punishment. When asked if she had any final words, Montgomery simply replied, "No." After her execution, her attorney, Kelly Henry, stated, "The decision to execute Lisa Montgomery shows the administration's complete lack of compassion. Those involved in her execution should deeply reflect on their actions." Amber McLaughlin, State, Missouri. In 2003, Amber McLaughlin, who was known at the time as Scott McLaughlin and was assigned male at birth, had a tumultuous relationship with Beverly Genther, her former partner. Despite Genther obtaining a restraining order, McLaughlin continued to seek her out. On the night of November 20th, 2003, McLaughlin waited near Genther's workplace. When Genther left, a confrontation ensued, ending fatally. Her body was found in a remote area soon after, and McLaughlin was arrested. During the trial, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict on the death penalty, allowing Judge Stephen Goldman to impose the sentence. McLaughlin had been diagnosed with intellectual disability and brain damage, and her defense argued that not enough evidence of her mental state had been presented during the trial. While serving her sentence, McLaughlin began her gender transition. For her last meal on death row, McLaughlin was given a cheeseburger, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and peanut M&Ms. 20 years after the crime, McLaughlin was executed by lethal injection in Missouri on January 3, 2023, becoming the first transgender person to be executed in the United States. When asked for final words, McLaughlin stated, "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." In this video, we will explore all the cases of women who, after committing horrific crimes, will face the death penalty in the United States in the coming years. Christy Michelle Scott. On August 16, 2008, in Russellville, Alabama, Christy Michelle Scott, 30, intentionally set fire to her home, an act that resulted in the loss of her 6-year-old son, Mason Scott. Investigators discovered that Scott had recently increased Mason's life insurance policies to a total of over $100,000. Additionally, evidence showed that she had searched the internet for fire-related deaths and had purchased gasoline shortly before the incident. On August 20, 2009, Christy Michelle Scott was found guilty of capital murder for the loss of her son. The jury recommended a sentence of life without the possibility of parole with a 7-5 vote. However, the judge overruled this recommendation and imposed the death penalty. As of January 2025, Scott has spent more than 15 years on Alabama's death row. Currently, no execution date has been scheduled. Her case remains under appeals and legal review. Patricia Blackman. On May 29, 1999, in Dothan, Alabama, Patricia Blackman called emergency services, reporting that her 28-month-old adopted daughter, Dominique Bryant, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found the child with severe injuries, including a fractured skull, multiple broken bones, bruises, and a shoe mark on her chest. The investigation revealed that Blackman had inflicted these fatal injuries, though the motive behind the crime remained unclear. In March 2002, she was found guilty of capital murder. The jury recommended the death penalty with a 10-2 vote, and the court accepted this recommendation, sentencing her to death. Currently, Patricia Blackman remains on Alabama's death row. She has spent more than 22 years awaiting execution with no scheduled date as her case continues through appeals. Tierra Capri Gobble. On January 14, 2004, emergency services responded to a call at a residence in Dothan, Alabama, where they found 4-month-old Cody Parrish unconscious. He was immediately transported to the hospital, where his passing was confirmed. The autopsy revealed that the cause was severe head trauma, consistent with violent shaking or a strong impact. Authorities launched an investigation and determined that Tierra Capri Gobble, the child's mother, was responsible for the fatal injuries. In 2005, Gobble was found guilty of capital murder. After jury deliberation, with a 10-2 vote in favor of the death penalty, she was sentenced to die. Since then, she has remained on death row at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Now, 44 years old, she has spent nearly 2 decades in prison. Her case remains under appeal, and no execution date has been scheduled. Wendy Andriano. On November 18, 2000, Joe Andriano, a man suffering from terminal cancer, was found lifeless in his home in Arizona. The autopsy revealed that he had been poisoned with sodium azide, a highly toxic substance. However, when the poison did not take immediate effect, he was fatally struck with a bar stool. Authorities launched an investigation and soon turned their attention to his wife, Wendy Elizabeth Andriano. Evidence presented at trial showed that she had administered the poison to her husband and, upon realizing he had not passed, brutally attacked him until he lost his life. In 2004, Andriano was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Since then, she has spent more than 2 decades in prison and is currently held in the Lumley unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Shauna Ford. On May 30, 2009, an armed group stormed the home of Raul Flores in Arivaca, Arizona, intending to steal money and drugs. During the invasion, Flores and his 9-year-old daughter, Brisania Flores, lost their lives after being shot. His wife, Gina Gonzalez, was also shot but managed to survive the attack. The investigation led to the arrest of Shauna Ford, a former border vigilante and leader of the Minuteman American Defense Group. Authorities determined that Ford had planned the crime under the belief that Flores was involved in drug trafficking and had large sums of money in his home. Her accomplices, Jason Bush and Albert Gaxiola, were also arrested. In 2011, Ford was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Additionally, she received a 65-year prison sentence for attempted murder and multiple robbery charges. Since then, she has spent approximately 14 years on death row, currently held in the Lumley unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Samantha Lucille Rebecca Allen. In July 2011, in Phoenix, Arizona, 10-year-old Amy Deal was subjected to a cruel punishment by her cousin, Samantha Allen, and Allen's husband, John Allen. The girl was forced to stay overnight inside a small plastic container, resulting in her death from asphyxiation. Investigations revealed a prolonged pattern of mistreatment toward Amy, who lived with multiple relatives in a home where she suffered constant abuse. The case shocked the community due to the severity of the mistreatment and the indifference shown by the adults responsible for her well-being. In 2017, Samantha Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder and 4 counts of child abuse. She was sentenced to death, becoming the 3rd woman on death row in Arizona. She's now spent more than 13 years incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Michelle Lynn Michaud. On December 2, 1997, 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson was abducted in Pleasanton, California, by Michelle Lynn Michaud and her partner James Anthony DeVaggio. Using a van specially modified for the abduction, the couple subjected Sampson to extreme mistreatment before ending her life and abandoning her body on a snowbank near South Lake Tahoe. The investigation led to the arrest of Michaud and DeVaggio, who were charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of assault. In 2002, both were found guilty and sentenced to death. Michaud has now spent more than 22 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Valerie D. Martin. In 2003, Valerie D. Martin, along with her 16-year-old son, a 14-year-old boy, and ex-convict Christopher Kenny, attacked her partner, 61-year-old William Whiteside, in Lancaster, California. After the assault, they locked him in the trunk of his car and set it on fire, ending his life. In 2010, Martin was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death for her role in the crime. She has now spent approximately 15 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Her case remains under appeal, and no execution date has been scheduled. Maureen McDermott. In 1985, Maureen McDermott, a former nurse facing financial troubles, planned the murder of her housemate, Stephen Eldridge, intending to collect his life insurance policy. To carry out the crime, she hired Jimmy Luna, a hospital assistant where she worked. Luna, along with other accomplices, stabbed Eldridge 44 times in his home in Van Nuys, California. They then attempted to mislead the investigation by mutilating the body to suggest a different motive. In 1990, McDermott was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances and sentenced to death. She has now spent more than 34 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. At one point, she was the only female inmate in the condemned unit. Catherine Thompson. On June 14, 1990, Melvin Thompson was shot and killed at his auto repair shop in Santa Monica, California. His wife, Catherine Thompson, a former office administrator from West Hills, orchestrated the crime to collect a $400,000 life insurance policy. To carry out the murder, she hired Philip Conrad Sanders. In September 1992, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, with the special circumstance of murder for financial gain. She was sentenced to death on June 10, 1993. She has now spent more than 31 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Manling Chang Williams. On August 7, 2007, Manling Chang Williams committed the brutal killings of her husband, Neil Williams, and their 2 young children, Devin, 7, and Ian, 3, in their home in Rowland Heights, California. Manling suffocated her children with a pillow and fatally attacked her husband with a samurai sword, inflicting over 90 wounds. Days later, she was apprehended, and during her trial in 2010, a jury found her guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Since then, Manling Williams has been on death row for over 14 years. Cherie Lash Rhodes. On February 20th, 2014, during a tribal meeting about her potential eviction, Cherie Lash Rhodes, the former president of the Cedarville Rancheria, a federally recognized Native American tribe in northeastern California, carried out a violent attack at the tribal office in Alturas, California. Rhodes fatally shot 4 people, including her brother, Rurik Davis, 50 years old, her niece, Angel Penn, 19 years old, her nephew, Glenn Keno, 30 years old, and the tribal administrator, Sheila Lynn Russo, 47 years old. After exhausting her ammunition, Rhodes grabbed a knife and used it on the fifth person, leaving 2 others wounded. The motive for the attack was tied to an eviction hearing related to accusations of federal fund embezzlement by Rhodes, who was being investigated for diverting at least $50,000 intended for the tribe. In 2017, Rhodes was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to death, plus 150 years in prison. Since then, Rhodes, aged 55, has been on death row for over 8 years. Maria del Rosario Alfaro. On June 15, 1990, Maria del Rosario Alfaro, at the age of 18, committed a heinous crime in Anaheim, California. She visited the home of 9-year-old Autumn Wallace, whom she knew through the girl's older sister, under the pretense of using the bathroom. However, Alfaro entered the residence with the intention of stealing valuables to fund her drug addiction. Once inside, she brutally stabbed Autumn approximately 50 times, resulting in the child's death. After the murder, Alfaro looted the house and stole items that she later sold for $240 to buy drugs. In 1992, Alfaro was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Orange County to receive a death sentence. Since then, Alfaro has been on death row in California for over 32 years. Skylar Preciosa Delian. At the age of 25, Skylar Preciosa Delian, originally known as Skylar Julius Delian, orchestrated the murders of Thomas and Jackie Hawks in 2004. Posing as a potential buyer for their yacht, Delian, along with accomplices, forced the Hawks to sign over the ownership of the vessel, then tied them to an anchor before throwing them into the sea, resulting in their deaths. Skylar gained fame for playing the Red Power Ranger in the early seasons of the TV show. Skylar has repeatedly asked the state to fund her gender transition while in prison. In 2008, Delian was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Since then, Delian has been on death row at San Quentin State Prison for over 15 years. In 2019, while awaiting execution, her gender was officially changed to female. Tanya Jamie Nelson. In April 2005, Tanya Jamie Nelson, a resident of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, orchestrated the brutal murders of the psychic Jade Smith, 52, and her 23-year-old daughter, Anita Vobert Nelson, had previously sought Smith's services, wanting a prediction about her extramarital affair with her brother-in-law. When Smith advised her to move forward, Nelson became enraged. She traveled from North Carolina to Westminster, California, accompanied by her accomplice, Philip Zamora. Upon arrival, they visited Smith's home under the pretense of a social visit. Once inside, Nelson and Zamora fatally stabbed Smith and Vaux multiple times. To try to conceal their identities, they covered the victims' faces and hands with white paint. In February 2007, Nelson was sentenced to death for 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her accomplice, Philip Zamora, 55, also from Roanoke Rapids, pleaded guilty on April 14th to 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to between 27 years and life in prison. Since then, Nelson has been on death row in California for nearly 15 years. Jessica Marie Hann. In February 2001, at the age of 26, Jason Michael Hann committed a series of horrific crimes that led to his conviction and subsequent death sentence. Hann inflicted fatal injuries on his 10-week-old daughter, Montana, in Desert Hot Springs, California. This tragic event occurred less than 2 years after the death of his 2-month-old son, Jason, in Vermont. The bodies of the infants were later found in separate storage units, both in an advanced state of decomposition. All these crimes were committed in the company of the children's mother. In 2013, Hann was convicted of first-degree murder and child abuse. Since then, Hahn, now known as Jessica Marie Hahn, following a gender transition while on death row, has been incarcerated for more than 11 years. Heather Leavell Keaton. In 2010, Heather Leavell Keaton was involved in the deaths of her partner's 2 children, 3-year-old Chase DeBlas and 4-year-old Natalie DeBlas, in Mobile, Alabama. These crimes were committed with the children's father, John DeBlaze. Prosecutors allege that she poisoned the children with antifreeze and then strangled them to death. Their remains were later found in wooded areas in Alabama and Mississippi. In 2015, Leavell Keaton was convicted of capital murder for the death of Chase and involuntary manslaughter for the death of Natalie. She was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Mobile County to receive such a sentence. On January 8, 2015, John DeBlas, 31, was officially sentenced to death by lethal injection by Mobile County Circuit Court Judge Roderick P. Rick Stout. Since then, Leavell Keaton has been on death row for approximately 10 years, incarcerated at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Her appeals have been unsuccessful, and currently there is no scheduled date for her execution. Lorraine Allison Hunter. In 2009, Lorraine Allison Hunter was convicted of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Albert Thomas. Hunter recruited her 16-year-old daughter, Brianna Hunter, to help with the crime, motivated by the financial gain of a $1 million life insurance policy. Prior to the murder, Hunter had forged Thomas's signature on 3 life insurance policies, naming herself as the beneficiary. On November 4, 2009, Thomas was found dead inside the cabin of his truck, having suffered 4 gunshot wounds. In August 2018, a Riverside County jury found Hunter guilty of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty. Since then, Lorraine Allison Hunter has been on death row in California for over 6 years. Belinda Magana. In May 2009, Belinda Magana, along with her boyfriend N.S. Narin, was convicted of the torture and murder of her 2-year-old son, Malachi Magana, in Corona, California. Authorities discovered the lifeless body of Malachi, showing signs of severe abuse, including bruises, burns, and indications of prolonged mistreatment. Magana and Narin tried to attribute the injuries to accidental causes, but medical examinations contradicted their claims. In 2015, both were found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture. Since then, Belinda Magana has been on death row in California for almost a decade, incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Susan Diane Eubanks. On October 26, 1997, at the age of 33, Susan Diane Eubanks committed the tragic murder of her 4 children: Brandon Armstrong, 14 years old; Austin Eubanks, 7 years old; Brigham Eubanks, 6 years old; and Matthew Eubanks, 4 years old, in San Diego, California. In 1999, she was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, due to a federal court order against the practice and a moratorium on executions ordered by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019, the death penalty cannot currently be carried out in California. On October 4, 2024, she was sentenced again to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As of January 2025, Susan Eubanks has been incarcerated for more than 27 years. Veronica Gonzalez. On November 6, 1995, 33-year-old Veronica Gonzalez, along with her husband Ivan Joe Gonzalez, committed the tragic murder of her 4-year-old niece, Jenny Rojas, in San Diego, California. Jenny had been removed from her mother, Mary Rojas's custody, due to her entering a rehabilitation program for drug addiction and the arrest of her husband for child abuse. Jenny and her siblings were initially placed with their grandmother, but later, because Veronica and Evan had more space and resources, Jenny was taken to live with them. On November 6, 1995, Jenny was found dead in the Gonzalez household. The autopsy revealed that she had suffered severe physical abuse, including burns, bruises, and internal injuries. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma. Evidence indicated that Jenny was forced to live in a box hung by her hands on a closet hook and was burned with a hairdryer. Veronica was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture and mutilation. In 1998, she was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Veronica Gonzalez is 63 years old and has been on death row for approximately 27 years. Susan Caro. That night, Susan Caro shot and killed her 3 children while they slept in their beds. After the incident, she was found in the family home and arrested. In 2002, Susan Caro was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including multiple deaths. As of January 2025, Susan Caro is 67 years old and has been on death row for approximately 23 years. Brooke Marie Rodiers. In 2006, 24-year-old Brooke Marie Rodiers, along with her accomplices Franchune Epps and Omar Hutchinson, was involved in the murders of Milton Chavez and Marvin Gabriel in Riverside County, California. The victims were lured into a motel room under the pretense of a sexual encounter, where they were later robbed and suffocated. Rodiers used her underwear to suffocate the men, even forcing a pair of panties into one of the victims' throats. The motive behind these brutal murders was theft. In October 2010, Rodiers was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances of multiple murders and murder during the commission of a robbery. She was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Brooke Marie Rodiers is 42 years old and has been on death row in California for over 14 years, incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Kathy Lynn Saranana. In December 2005, 30-year-old Kathy Lynn Saranana, along with her husband Raul Ricardo Saranana, was involved in the tragic deaths of their 2 nephews, 14-year-old Conrad Morales and 11-year-old Ricky Morales. The couple had taken the children into their home in Corona, California, with the intention of providing care. However, instead of offering a safe environment, they subjected them to prolonged abuse and neglect. In June 2009, Kathy Saranana was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for her role in Ricky Morales' death. Her husband Raul received a similar sentence for his involvement in the children's deaths. As of January 2025, Kathy Lynn Saranana is 50 years old and has been on death row in California for over 15 years. Her case is still in the appeals process. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman. Between October and November 1986, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman, along with her partner James Marlowe, committed a series of atrocious acts in several states, including the following crimes: the kidnapping and brutal murder of 32-year-old Sandra Neri on October 11, 1986 in Costa Mesa, California; the murder of 35-year-old Pamela Simmons on October 28, 1986 in Bullhead City, Arizona; the kidnapping and murder of 20-year-old Karina Noah on November 7, 1986 in Redlands, California; and the kidnapping and murder of 19-year-old Lai Murray on November 12, 1986 in Huntington Beach, California. The criminal spree of the couple ended on November 14, 1986, when they were apprehended. After their arrest, Kaufman confessed to the murders, but her defense attorneys argued that she suffered from battered woman syndrome, claiming that Marlowe had beaten her, manipulated her, and starved her, leading her to become involved in the crimes. In 1990, Kaufman was sentenced to death. becoming the first woman in California to receive a death sentence since the restoration of the death penalty in the state in 1977. As of January 2025, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman is 63 years old and has been on death row in California for approximately 35 years. Carrie Lynn Dalton. In 1988, Carrie Lynn Dalton, along with her accomplices, kidnapped Irene Melanie May, a woman known to them. They held her captive, subjecting her to severe physical abuse, including the use of battery acid, and eventually murdered her. The brutality of the crime shocked the community and led to a swift investigation. Dalton was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances, including torture and stalking. In 1995, she was convicted and sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Carrie Lynn Dalton is 71 years old and has been on death row in California for over 35 years. Margaret Ann Allen. On November 6, 2005, 49-year-old Margaret Ann Allen committed a chilling crime in Titusville, Florida. Allen lived with her daughter when she began to suspect that her former housekeeper, 51-year-old Wendy Wright, had stolen money from her. Tensions between the two women escalated over these suspicions, and Allen believed Wright had taken $2,000 from her purse. Consumed by rage, Allen confronted Wright, accusing her of theft, and in a fit of anger, physically attacked Wright and forced her to swallow bleach and other chemicals. She then taped her mouth shut and killed her with a belt. Once Wright was dead, Allen, with the help of two accomplices, disposed of Wright's body in an isolated area near Mims, Florida. It wasn't long before investigators connected Allen to the crime. During the investigation, they found evidence linking Allen to Wright's death, and she was arrested shortly afterward. In 2011, Allen was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including torture and kidnapping. She was sentenced to death. As of 2025, Margaret Ann Allen is 68 years old and has spent almost 14 years on death row. Kimberly Cargill. On June 18, 2010, 43-year-old Kimberly Cargill committed the murder of 39-year-old Cherry Walker in Tyler, Texas. Cargill, a mother of 4 and a nurse, lived with 2 of her children. Cherry Walker, a woman with intellectual disabilities, worked as a babysitter for Cargill's children, and the two had known each other for several years. On that date, Cargill tricked Walker into coming to her home under the pretext of needing help. Once inside, she attacked Walker and suffocated her to death to prevent her from testifying in a child protection case. After the murder, Cargill disposed of Walker's body, doused it with lighter fluid, and set it on fire. The investigation into Walker's death led authorities to Cargill, who was arrested in 2012 and charged with capital murder. During the trial, it was revealed that Cargill was being investigated by the Department of Child Protective Services due to allegations of child abuse. Her 2 younger children, Luke and Zach, were removed from her custody and placed in the care of relatives. On May 18, 2010, Cargill violated the custody agreement by not returning her son to his mother after picking him up from daycare. Later, Cargill faced a custody hearing, and Cherry Walker received a subpoena to testify against her, which led to her death. In 2012, Cargill was convicted of capital murder. As of January 2025, Kimberly Cargill is 58 years old and has been on death row for approximately 14 years. Tina LaSonia Brown. On March 24, 2010, 39-year-old Tina Sona Brown committed the murder of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman in Pensacola, Florida. Brown was a mother to a daughter, Brittany Miller, and had a criminal history related to drugs. On the day of the crime, Brown, along with her daughter Brittany and neighbor Heather Lee, ambushed Zimmerman, attacking her with a stun gun, gagging her, and confining her in the trunk of a car. The trio drove Zimmerman to a forest where they beat her with an iron bar, doused her with gasoline, set her on fire, and left her to die. Zimmerman survived long enough to identify Brown, Miller, and Lee as her attackers before dying from her injuries 2 weeks later. After Zimmerman's death, authorities arrested Brown, her daughter Brittany, and neighbor Heather Lee. In 2012, Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Her daughter, Brittany Miller, received a life sentence, and Heather Lee was sentenced to 25 years in prison after testifying against Brown. As of January 2025, Tina Brown is 54 years old and has been on death row for approximately 12 years. Robin Roe. In the early hours of February 10, 1992, a fire consumed the duplex home of Robin Roe in Boise, Idaho. At the time, Roe was staying with a friend after a disagreement with her husband, Randy Roe. The fire resulted in the deaths of her husband, Randy, 34, and their 2 children, Joshua, 10, and Tabitha, 8. Investigations revealed that the smoke alarm had been disabled, and an accelerant had been used to start the fire. Additionally, it was discovered that Robin, who was 34 years old at the time of the crime, had taken out large life insurance policies on her family members before the incident. Roe was arrested on February 3, 1992, and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, evidence was presented showing that she had a history of financial difficulties and had received insurance money in a previous incident in 1980, when her son Keith died in a fire under suspicious circumstances. In March 1993, Roe was found guilty of all charges, and on December 16, 1993, she was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Robin Roe is 67 years old and has been on death row for approximately 32 years. Linda Anita Carty, a former schoolteacher from St. Kitts and Nevis, was convicted of the abduction and murder of a 25-year-old woman in an attempt to take her newborn son. Prosecutors argued that Carty orchestrated the crime with the help of drug traffickers, while she claimed she was framed due to her past work as an informant. Despite multiple appeals, including a petition to the U.S. Supreme Court, her conviction remains upheld. Brittany Marlowe Holberg. On November 13, 1996, Brittany Marlowe Holberg entered the home of 80-year-old A.B. Towery Sr. in Amarillo, Texas. During the attack, Towery was stabbed nearly 60 times with various objects, including a paring knife, a butcher knife, a grapefruit knife, and a fork. He also suffered blunt force trauma to the head from a hammer, and a 1-foot-long lamp pole was forced down his throat. Holberg was arrested months later in Tennessee and extradited to Texas. In 1998, a jury found her guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to death. She remains on death row with no execution date scheduled.